Hello and welcome. You're watching Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. After weeks of trade tensions with India, U.S. President Donald Trump has signalled a potential thaw. In a social media post, Trump said that the two countries are continuing negotiations to address the trade barriers, and he's looking forward to speaking with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Trump wrote, and I quote, "I feel certain that there will be no difficulty in coming to a successful conclusion for both of our great countries," end of quote. Prime Minister Modi echoed the sentiment, calling India and the US close friends and natural partners. The Prime Minister said both teams are working to conclude talks at the earliest. He added, and I quote, "Our trade negotiations will pave the way for unlocking the limitless potential of the India-US partnership," end of quote. Sources say that positive messages indicate trade talks are back on track, and sources also add that officials from India and US are likely to have an exchange of trade delegations soon in a bid to find common ground. Meanwhile, CNBC has reported that Trump has asked the European Union to hit China and India with tariffs of up to 100% over their Russia oil purchases. Trump reportedly indicated that Washington would mirror any such measures taken by the EU. This comes at a time when free trade agreement talks between India and the European Union are nearing completion. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has said that about 65% of chapters have been finalized. Goyal added that he is hopeful that an FTA will be concluded substantially by the time the EU Trade and Agricultural Commissioner visits India this week. Joining us now to discuss this further is Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, and Kanwal Sibal, former foreign secretary and also former ambassador to the US. Ambassador Sibal, if I can begin with you, this is a positive indication. Both leaders making this statement that they want to conclude talks at the earliest. Does this mean that some of the thorny points in the relationship have now been taken care of and negotiations could be concluded very soon?
I don't think so. I don't think that the thorny points have been taken care of. The thorniest point is the 25% penalty tariffs that Trump has imposed on India for buying Russian oil and Russian defense equipment. There is no indication that he's willing to lift those tariffs in order to create a more congenial atmosphere to have the next round of talks. Otherwise, it will be under the pressure of these 25% additional tariffs, which means 50% in all. And therefore, India would be expected to make some further concessions to satisfy Trump. Now, remember that as far as we know, the interim deal had been negotiated and satisfactorily negotiated insofar as the negotiators are concerned. And this was put on the table for approval of Trump, but he didn't approve of it because he wants a much bigger deal. In fact, he said that, he was quoted as saying by the USTR, Jamieson Greer, that he wants everything to be opened up or almost everything to be opened up. Now, therefore, he would be looking at some further concessions from us. Now, is it that we can go beyond the concessions that we have already made? I suppose there would be some room to do that, but not enough to be able to pander to Trump's demands and allow him then to say that he has extracted a one-sided deal from India and India has promised all kinds of things.
Right.
These are the kind of statements he has made after the agreement, framework agreement with the EU and the tariff agreement with Japan and South Korea. So the pressure is on us. At the same time, as you have just quoted, Trump saying that he wants Europe to impose 100% tariffs on India and China for buying Russian oil. So he's speaking as usual, in ways in which we can't really pin him down as to what exactly he expects, what he wants. He's very inconsistent and he doesn't mind being inconsistent.
So
he thinks that unpredictability is a tool he has in order to keep the other side under pressure, not knowing how he would react to any given situation. So this gives him a lot of leeway to keep making his demands, and he doesn't mind changing his position.
Absolutely. So let me just get in Ambassador Meera Shankar on that as well. Ambassador Meera Shankar, do you feel now this is a positive development that gives an opening to the sides to come to some sort of breakthrough and common ground?
Well, I would say that it's a positive opening in the sense that the rhetoric has been tamped down And there are more positive sounds coming out of President Trump, and the Trump administration overall has been silent with regard to its very macho statements that it was making vis-a-vis India. So that's the positive. It opens a door. India has also said it's willing to, Prime Minister Modi has said he's willing to re-engage in trade talks with the US. But as Ambassador Sybil said, this is not going to be easy. And India will have to continue to be hard-headed about the negotiations where our vital interests are concerned. Now, the point is that since no deal was agreed upon, whatever we put on the table can be taken away if you're beginning anew, so that you don't get pushed each time to a fresh goalpost. That's what I mean by being a bit hard-headed in the negotiations. The second thing is, I don't think it'll be possible for India to have a trade deal while special sanctions on Russian oil, or special tariffs, I would say, on Russian oil purchases continue. Because if you even look at US secondary sanctions in the past, they have basically targeted the companies involved. Even China, when it was helping Pakistan with its nuclear program, they would very selectively target 1 or 2, 3 or 4 Chinese companies. And then there would be a new company set up, and then they would start their cooperation again. Right. But here, it's across the board on all Indian exports. So it's pretty savage. And it's not something which has been sharply focused. Even though I would say that putting sanctions on other countries for buying oil from whichever source they find is the most reasonable is itself, something which exceeds U.S. national law. I mean, It doesn't exceed their national law, but it exceeds the sovereignty of other countries. Absolutely. So I would say that it's going to be not an easy negotiation, but there are positive signals. And from India's side, it would be important that there is some way to address these special tariffs which have been put on.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Ambassador Meera Shankar, I'll return to you. Ambassador Sybil, what do you think has brought Donald Trump and India to this stage now, where they're at least making some positive signals to each other?
I think there has been work done behind the scenes, precisely with the idea of exchanging some positive messaging so that the downward slide in relationship is arrested, and especially the rhetoric from the American side is brought under control, because this is having a much larger effect in terms of the sentiments of the public in India. And also there have been consequences of this in this Hindu hate business that seems to be rising amongst the MAGA crowd, the racist part of the MAGA crowd. So to that extent, this is a good development. As I said, this has been structured deliberately behind the scenes to pan out this way. However, you can't control Trump. And we will see now whether his henchmen pipe down Besant and Lutnick and Navarro, and they keep quiet, because I'm sure they have been caught off guard also by Trump's sudden tweet, because decisions there are personalized. These are not process-driven decisions. Right. So if that happens, if the rhetoric gets toned down, and until the next round of negotiation takes place, all is quiet on the Western Front, I think that will be a good thing. But the fundamental problem will remain, because Trump is quite unpredictable. He has linked these special tariffs to movement on the Ukraine peace front. And if that runs into trouble, then he'll have even less room to lift the sanctions, special sanctions on India, because then the question would be that why are you making this soft gesture towards Putin when Putin is not ready to negotiate peace in Ukraine? So he's not necessarily, as a foreign minister said, mix the trade issue with the non-trade issue and reduce the margin of maneuver And with
Absolutely.
50% tariffs, there's no way that we can have a stable economic relationship. He has to move away from that. And as I said earlier, we can't negotiate with this sort of democracies hanging on our head. That if the U.S. side is not satisfied with the new offers that we may make, then these 50% tariffs would stay. I think
Right.
there is work ahead, but let's remain a bit optimistic and see where it goes.
You know, Ambassador Meera Shankar, in June, we had already come to some sort of agreement. India had proposed a trade framework to the US whereby the tariffs were lower than 15%, at least. How do you think the negotiations will begin now? How will India approach fresh negotiations after recent rounds of trade tensions and very sharp rhetoric?
I'm sure that there will be efforts through back channels to try to lay out the contours of the negotiations and the contacts. But it's clear that both sides want to pick up the threads. And since there was speculation that part of the reason that President Trump was sending back the trade deals with India, even though negotiators felt it had virtually been concluded, was his personal peeve over some of the statements which had been made during the India-Pakistan conflict, that he had brought it to an end, which India had contradicted. Maybe by now, if cooler, saner advice is prevailing, then perhaps what we would like to see is a more reasonable US position with regard to India's red lines. I think it's important that the US understands it. Now they've understood that we really can't be browbeaten into complying with what they would like. At the end of the day, a trade agreement has to be acceptable to both sides, particularly for a large developing country like India, which has constituencies politically important, economically sensitive and vulnerable constituencies, such as farmers, who could be very adversely impacted. And that could cause its own set of social and political turmoil in India. So it's not something which, any government is going to accept lightly.
Right.
So at some level, I think it would be important for the US to recognize this and to adopt a more reasonable posture in the negotiations.
Okay, Ambassador Sibbal, considering that the statements made by Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi are quite similar, the tone is very similar, and then you had Donald Trump also retweeting or posting the Prime Minister's tweet on his Truth Social handle, does this go to show that both sides and leaders, officials of both sides had clearly coordinated this exercise to show that India and United States remain united despite the kind of narratives that may have emerged from the SCO summit?
Well, you can't really pin down exactly what Trump's thinking is and what his next move would be, logically speaking. Now, as I said before, it's a good thing that both sides have felt that we must try and tone down the rhetoric that was developing and the negative atmosphere that was being created. And I think there are two things that have persuaded Trump to have a renewed look at his strategy towards India. One is that unlike the others, India stood firm. And certainly this has gone to the advantage of India and Modi and his leadership. We have not reacted with the polemics and rhetoric, but we have stood our position. And the second is the very nervous reaction in US think tanks and media and political circles of the photograph of three leaders, Xi Jinping, Putin, and Modi, hobnobbing, in Tianjin, and questions being asked in the United States about losing India, and that this has been one of the most serious blows to U.S. foreign policy that Trump has inflicted. So maybe there is some rethinking that it is not wise to push more India into the wrong direction and alienate it, because it might affect the larger geopolitical interests of the United States. Now, this is rational thinking. Now, whether Trump is capable of internalizing this rational thinking and control his impulses, I don't know, because he's very, very unpredictable, and he has treated his allies so shoddily. Allies who have served U.S. interests far more than India has, but he has not had no compunction in doing so. So for us to assume that he'll have some special corner from India might be a mistake.
We have to be realistic about that. But
as
we'll
I
have to
said,
leave it there.
Yeah.
We'll have to leave it there, Ambassador. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm completely running out of time, but it's been a great discussion with you and Ambassador Meera Shankar, as always. We are going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. Our discussion on India-US ties and this positive momentum continues. We will be joined by Mukesh Aghi, President, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, on the other side. Welcome back. We have been discussing the expectations from the India-US trade talks after President Trump and Prime Minister Modi signaled optimism in social media posts. Joining us now on the program is Mukesh Aghi, President of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Mr. Aghi, thank you very much for being with us. How optimistic are you about a positive tone to the negotiations, a positive conclusion possibly to the negotiations?
Well, Parikshit, you have to understand, before we conclude any trade agreement, we needed to bring the temperature down between the two countries. And I think the communication via Truth Social and tweet does help to bring the temperature down. And more important is build a positive sentiment between the two countries. You have to understand that while you have two leaders talking about building a strong partnership, why it is important to have this trade agreement, you have forces within the U.S. who are not keen to have that agreement. You have basically individuals within the White House talking about putting punitive tariffs beyond 50% in India. There are discussions going on with the EU to have 100% tariff on countries which are doing trade with Russia. So I think we are not out of the woods, but at least we have a sentiment which is moving in the right direction.
Right. Do you expect now, because every few days we are seeing some improvement in ties, does this indicate to you that we could possibly see a pause on the 25% additional tariff?
So what we have requested and written to the president, that the secondary tariff of 25% is unjust, and for the trade and negotiation to move forward, I think it's important we basically take that out. What we have to do is look at some kind of an off-ramp for the president so he can move in that direction. What is that off-ramp? It could be multiple ways. That needs to be managed from the India side. It is important that India has restrained making any comments on the secondary tariff, with the exception of saying they're not, they're unjust itself. So I think both sides have to find ways to move forward, and I think the social media communication between the Prime Minister and the President basically moves it in the right direction.
How soon do you expect formal in-person negotiations to begin?
I believe that it should start moving very, very fast, because I'm aware that USTR team is in the neighborhood talking to other countries, and it'll be critical that they come into Delhi and start talking to our negotiators in India itself, because what's happening is every day that goes by, the the people who are working in the garment industry, people who are working in the jewel industry, people who are working in the low end of the exports are suffering. And it's important that we basically take this 25% tariff away, so at least the orders, the execution of the job continues without major interruption itself.
Right. When it comes to the off-ramp, what do you think could be an offer that India could make which would suit the president?
Well, I think it's not just about India making that offer. I think U.S. has to provide some kind of alternative to India on the energy purchase, because India has a requirement, and if it's able to find cheaper oil, it is India's interest. So I think from that perspective, if the U.S. can provide more energy, or other partners of the U.S. can provide that, I think that could be a way for India to basically wean away slowly from Russian oil and explore other alternatives itself. So, but I think it is also important to understand that you cannot dictate penalty on a nation because it is buying energy for its needs, for its people. India is a sovereign nation, it's a proud nation. And so I think there has to be a give and take on both sides to find an exit ramp so you're able to move things forward.
Right. We've also been noticing how both leaders, their responses on social media have been coordinated. So clearly there's been a lot of work happening behind the scenes to put things on track. What's been your recommendation and recommendation from industry chambers as to what is at stake? And if this relationship had gone down, how would this damage the two countries?
Well, there has been a lot of effort. You have to understand, the CEOs have met with the president. We have reached out to the Congress leadership in the U.S. itself to basically impress on the president. We have reached out to the family members. So there has been a lot of energy put in to bring the relationship back on track. You also have to understand there are vested interests which would like to see this relationship get off the track. There are neighbors who are keen to ensure that India's partnership with the U.S. does not continue in the same trajectory. So we have to deal with those interests which are against a strong U.S.-India partnership. But you have to understand that you have geopolitically, the two countries are aligned in every aspect. From an economic perspective, countries are aligned. We are looking at large investments of U.S. companies who are not only manufacturing in India for de-risking their supply chain from China, but more important is they're also looking at growing Indian market itself. So in every aspect, the interest of the U.S. continues to be India. And so on that basis, you saw a lot of effort being put in by people, by corporates, by interest groups to ensure that the relationship comes back to the track.
Okay, my final question, sir, very briefly. What do you think will be a good tariff line or an average tariff at which the trade deal should be agreed upon by both sides?
Well, we have always emphasized that a tariff between the U.S. and India should not be more than 10%. And the reason we said that is because you have a large chunk of exports from India, which are basically lower priced goods coming in. But at the same time, if our ambition is to take this relationship to a $500 billion trade agreement between two countries, a 10% tariff is a fair tariff. But at the same time, keeping the interest of India, which on the ag side and also on the dairy, which is red line, but we'll find a solution on that also. Because I think the objective is to find common grounds, find a win-win value proposition. And I strongly believe that we will find a solution so both countries can move forward in driving the objective of $500 billion trade by 2030 itself.
All right, Mr. Aghi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views on what has been the effort made behind the scenes to put the relationship back on track and how these positive messages at least give a room and opening to the negotiators to begin sitting on the table and starting talks afresh. Thank you once again for being with us. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Newscentre. More news and updates continue right here.